Hey everyone, so today we've got a bit of an interesting video. So we're going to talk about tic-tac-toe and how this relates to sword theory and why Midgard, or Chudan if you're in Japanese styles, is, well, not terrible, that's a bit of a clickbaity title, but not so good as a static stance against an advanced fencer. Alrighty, so we've got a game of tic-tac-toe here. If you haven't played it, it's basically you're in a 3x3 grid and you take turns putting in your counter and you're trying to get 3 in a row, either on the 3 verticals, the 3 horizontals, or the diagonals, so 8 potential lines. And this is a theory that I came up with when I was in year 1 to never lose the game, especially if you go first. Now, I guess a good question to ask would be, how many of you have ever won this game against an adult? And if your answer is never, that's actually pretty common. And there's a good reason for that, and we'll get through that in the theory. Now, I promise this does relate to sword theory, we will get there, but let's start with some basic theory. So, if you put 1 in a row, so 1 counter on anywhere, any line, then we'll call that a blocker, because it blocks off the lines that are available for the other person to win on those lines. For example, if I put the X here, no longer can the O's win on this line, and this line. So I've essentially blocked off 3 lines. This is a blocker. Now, let's say if I put 2 on any one line, then that's a threat, because now there's a threat, because if I put another one here, I've won. So the other person has to respond to that one, otherwise they lose. So blocks and threats, relatively straightforward. Now, if you say, where would you like to start? Then most people who have a working brain, compos mentis adults, will say we'll start in the middle because you block the most possible lines. And you do. You block, quite a fair few lines this way. But you can actually never win in this position if the other person knows how to play the game. There's no way, because you just can't. You're always chasing each other, and I'll show you why. So starting in the middle is essentially Midgard, and it's the safest way because you block off the most lines. The sword is the most in between you and your opponent that it possibly can be. So yes, it's the safest. But you're always going to be chasing, and the reason why is because any movement you make from Midgard, you have to draw the sword back, and then you can take that action. You can't act straight from Midgard unless it's a direct thrust. And even with a direct thrust, then you still have to come into distance, and they know that that's the only direct motion that you can make unless they walk into it, or do some other suboptimal action like trying to strike at your sword with no threat to you. And that's essentially fighting against the kid. And we'll talk about that situation later, but we'll show how chasing happens in tic-tac-toe theory with starting in the middle, and it's the same thing for Midgard of chasing each other. So let's say that you play X in the middle, and the opponent now has anywhere to play. They can play anywhere they want, and if they're a working, adult who knows how to play the game, then they'll play it in a corner, because they'll block the most lines. If you play it in a corner, then you'll put it somewhere else, probably in a corner as well, so that you put a threat somewhere else. They'll block that one, you'll have to block their threat, they'll have to block your threat, and then it's a stalemate. You'll block off their potential line, and then it's game over. No one's won. It's a draw. Well, the only way to win if you start in the middle is if the other person does either they don't see an opportunity where you've got a threat and they put it somewhere else, which happens a lot with kids, or if they take this line and you intentionally plan away from it. You can see here, now I've got 2 threats, 2 lines that I have a threat on, and the opponent cannot respond to both of them in one go. So the win condition for tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses is not actually to get 3 in a row, but it's actually to put 2 threats that the opponent cannot respond to in the one move. And it's the same for fencing. People think that the goal of sword sparring is to hit the opponent. The goal of sword sparring is not actually to hit the opponent. The goal of sword sparring is to be able to control the opponent and know what they're going to do so that you can set up a situation where you can hit them. Now obviously it doesn't always work that way. You get people who are more athletic, more skilled than you, faster than you, and essentially they're the people who can get 2 turns in the time that you get 1, and there's not much you can do about them. But in terms of fencing predictively in this way, then you're trying to make a threat in two places. Now, I did show you how you can win here, but it's only because they started in a suboptimal position. So most games where adults are thinking, then they will not start. They will not start in this position because it blocks off only one line, when you can block off two lines, well, three lines actually, this way. So what should you start with? I say that you should start in a corner. And people say, but then you've only blocked off three lines rather than blocking off as many as you can. And it's true. But this way, you know what they're going to do, and you can have a plan so that you can create a threat on two lines before they can react. So let's say that you start here, your opponent's a careful fencer, they know what they're doing, they want to block off as many lines as they can and play the safest that they can. They'll take center. So here, you take opposite. And then they say, oh, well, look, I'll take this line because then I can block off the most lines. They block off this line, and you take this line, and bam, you've got two threats. And so then you've guaranteed a win. Okay, so let's say that instead of taking the center, then they take the opposite corner so that you can't take it. Well, that's fine. Then you play it in a corner as well. You have placed a threat that they have to respond to, so they have to place their position here. Then you take it here. You've created two threats, and they cannot win at this point, because on the next turn, whichever one they block, you take the other one and you've won. And let's say that they do something, you know, that's not that. So they play in a middle square, right? Well, in this case, then your next move probably should still be this, because then you'll force this outcome, and then you've still forced a two-threat position where you can win. And that way, then you know that you're going to win. So, how does this relate to sword fencing? So, if you take the middle square and you play the most safe that you can, then you've made it so that you've taken the most lines. The sword is the most between you and your opponent it can possibly get. But what are they going to do? You don't actually know. You've got no prediction that you've set up that you think that you can work off of and win from. They could go anywhere and you don't really have a plan for it, unless they take a stupid move, which, you know, we know is suboptimal. In fencing, then, if you're fighting against a beginner, then they're essentially the child who might start in a suboptimal move, or they might just completely miss a threat and then you'll win. So fighting from Midgard is fine. But if you're fighting against an advanced fencer, you can guarantee that they're going to have some, or at least a few ways to counter the Midgard, and then it just becomes a game where you're chasing after each other. And in chasing after each other, then no one has the advantage, and it's always a draw. So that's why I advocate for, instead of staying in Midgard where it's the safest, create an opening so that they think that there's an opening that they'll take, and you have a plan from that opening, so that from there you've given them the thought that they've won, and then you've actually created a situation that you're in control of and you know that you can win. So an example of that would be, rather than using Midgard, to use a guard where you're putting the sword to one side. That way you know everything is going to come from that side. You don't have a question, is it going to come from the left side, is it going to come from the right side, are they going to go above, below, stab? If your sword is on the right hand side of your body, you know every single attack is going to come from your left hand side, because that's the only way they're going to attack. They're not going to attack to the right side because it's a closed off line. And therefore, you should react to it that way, and your reaction time will be quicker because you know what you're going to do. And you can come up with a plan for how to respond to it. So that's tic-tac-toe theory and how it relates to fencing, and why I think that Midgard is not the best static guard to fight against an advanced opponent in. Now, if you're better than your opponent, you're faster, you're stronger, whatever, then that's a different situation. You're not fighting against someone who's an equal to you. And in those cases, then Midgard's fine, because you can just use it as the place where you're the closest to them. But I think we should aim for a goal where we fence in a way so that people, you assume that they're at the level that you are or better, and then you try your best to force an outcome so that it's in your favour. And it's a game that you can only really play with a slightly longer two-handed sword. If you're playing with short weapons, it usually doesn't work so well, so there are limitations to this theory. but for what I do with the Jedokgun, which is essentially a Japanese Nadachi length sword, it works fantastically. Now people are asking, okay, well, if you're going second, then can you ever win? Um, if you're going second, then it's very hard for you to win because you're always chasing. It's the same situation as if you start in the middle. You're always chasing them. There is one situation where you cannot lose though. So let's say that your opponent started it in the corner, like I advocated for them to, and you take the center. They've taken the opposite corner to try and set up so that their next position will be here to create the two lines of threat. But what you can do first is that you can threaten them in a way so that they can't put their position there. For example, if I play here, then they have to play there, I have to play there, 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 there. And it's a draw because we're chasing each other. And that's the best outcome that you can get against somebody who knows what they're doing. There's no better outcome where you can actually win as a second player. And I think that says a lot about fencing, because if you're the person who's on the chasing end, it's very hard for you to win. So that's why I advocate for predictive fencing and trying to create the situation yourself. So I hope you like that. It's a bit of a contentious topic, ragging on Midgard, because I know a lot of the Japanese schools and a lot of the Korean schools also like it. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you've got any thoughts or disagreements with me, feel free to put it down below. And if you want to play tic-tac-toe against some other adults, give it a go. You might actually win this time. Hope you found that interesting, and with that, I'll see you next time.